Hello, my name is Anna from Bread Journey. If you know my channel, if you know me, this type of bread is probably no surprise to you because this is what I like to do. I like to score beautiful bread. But today I'm actually going to show you something a little bit different. I'm going to show you what kind of bread do I make so I can score it this way. I hope you like this recipe. This is my favorite recipe. It makes 2 loaves and I'm going to take you step by step so you can bake something like this. And today I am going to show you something slightly different than what you usually see on my channel. If you have found me, you probably know that I really like scoring bread, and that is what I'm mostly known for. If you've tried scoring bread, you might also know that not every recipe works perfectly with freely scoring. So today what I'm going to do is I will show you how I make my favorite bread recipe that gives you the fluffy loaf but also works great with my scoring patterns. So the first thing you would need would be freshly milled wheat berries. I go with Barton Springs Mill. This is not an ad, this is not sponsored, this is just the grains that I really love because they just have this incredibly sweet, beautiful flavor. So this is what 200 grams look like. And if you don't have wheat berries and a mill, don't worry, I will give you an alternative for that. So this is, like I said, 200 grams. And I milled them at the finest setting of my mock mill. You see that this looks very close to what you would buy in the store. So if you don't have fresh berries and you don't have a mill, you can just go ahead and get your regular whole wheat flour that you use, with the caveat that you should not expect the flavor to be as rich as it would be with freshly milled grains. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to sift this, keeping the flour in the bowl where I will be making my bread, and then the bran into a separate bowl. Work in smaller doses, just like that. So what I end up having is some fresh fine milled flour and the bran. The quantity of what you have here and here will be different depending on how coarse your whole wheat flour is, especially if you're using store-bought flour, but you really shouldn't worry about it. It comes to roughly half and half. This will all get mixed in at the end anyway, so don't fret about the quantities of these. I end up with having roughly 100 grams each of flour and bran. And now to this that we have here, I will add 200 grams of hot boiling water. Just like that. Give it a quick stir to make sure that everything is nice and wet. And then keep it covered until you need it for the step of incorporating this into the dough. Now that we have that, it is time to mix our starter. This is what I keep in the fridge. This is my rice starter. And there are 35 grams of it here that I will add to my jug. Whether you're using a jar or another container, doesn't matter. So 35 grams of starter, 160 grams of bread flour, and 160 grams of filtered water. The fact that I'm adding white bread flour to a rye starter gives just the right balance of fluffiness and growth from the white flour, but also flavor and micronutrients from the rye starter. I will make a video about my starter later if you think that that would be useful. I believe that a rye starter has a lot of benefits. It's very stable, it's easy to make, it's easy to maintain, and of course you can use it for whole grain loaves, for rye bread, and you don't have to convert your white starter into that every time you're wanting to try something new. Rye starter is denser, even if it's 100% hydration, so make sure that you incorporate it well. This is our starter now. It's at, let me see, it's like 1.25 cups. And then we'll see how well it's grown after 7 hours at 81 degrees. I use a bread proofer. If you do not have one, you can keep this in a cold oven with the lights turned on. See you in a few hours. 3 hours before the starter is ready and 4 hours after we mixed the previous step, I added 600 grams of bread flour to the sifted flour and 500 grams of filtered water. We are going to mix this in for a long 3-hour autolyse. I know this might sound excessive. Why would you need 3 whole hours? A lot of recipes only ask for 30 minutes. The first time I did a 3-hour autolyse, it was under the guidance of Kristen from Foolproof Baking, and I can say that it made a world of difference. Besides, it's not taking any additional time from you. You'll just let the dough rest there for 3 hours and the starter will still ferment for as long as it needs to. So I really do not see any downsides to a long autolyse except that your bread is going to be amazing. Just mix thoroughly. It's sticky, it's wet, it's not a consistency that you can really need, but that's how we want it. And so you just leave this covered for 3 hours until the starter is ready. I'll see you then. After a 3-hour autolyse, the dough is delightfully stretchy. Look at this. This will be pretty easy to work with. And our starter is fluffy and grown, and look at this. It's very important that when you incorporate the starter, you do it evenly, not only because you don't want any lumps of just rock solid dough in your bread, but also because at this stage is when you develop even more dough strength by properly working the dough. So this is how I do it. First off, you see of course that the starter is much more liquid, so it keeps running around. So I seal it in by lifting the sides of the dough and having the starter kind of sealed inside. And one more round. Now, digging my hand in the middle of the dough, grabbing the rest with my thumb, what I do is I lift it, let it fall, and then do this again in a quick motion like this. And then I roll the bowl as I go so that I kind of do this around. At some point the dough will get flexible enough and it will be mixed in enough that I will mostly be working with my 4 fingers kind of underneath the dough, rolling it like that. Somebody in the comments previously said that this looks like the imitation of a bread making machine or like a dough mixing machine. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the machine was trying to imitate human hands, but if you know how a machine works, try to think of it that way. So once again, hand underneath, these kind of rolling motions. This is kind of a workout and you will want to quit and say, okay, I think I'm done now. The way to know that you are not yet done is if you still feel warm, wet starter. You'll learn to develop a feel for it because all of your dough, of course, is wet and is warmish, but you will feel with your fingers the difference when you're hitting just unincorporated starter. And when you don't feel any difference between wetness and between different temperatures with your hand is when your dough is incorporated. So keep working. Okay, I am done now. I will just again lift the sides up. Also, while you're working the dough, make sure that you get all the way to the middle of the bottom, not just around it. And this kind of helps you make sure that you got everywhere. Okay. This is it for now. I'm leaving it for another 30 minutes and then we'll come back and add in the salt. After half an hour, I will add 17 grams of salt diluted in 10 to 20 grams of water. The technique here is very similar to how we incorporated the starter, except that I first start with kind of pushing the salt into the dough. So I take all my 5 fingers, put them in and turn a little, and then again and again and again. You feel the dough really hardening under your fingertips, and this is what salt does. So after you've done this for a little while, make sure that you push the edges where the salt hasn't really gotten, that you push them underneath like this. Okay, when you see that it doesn't stick to the sides, that the dough is kind of taking its own shape, that's when I do some more of the same kind of mixing that I did when I added the starter. So, quick reminder, your 4 fingers underneath, guiding it with your thumb if you need to, and just do these rolling motions. Here we go. You'll notice this time that the dough is a lot livelier. It seems to have a life of its own and it wants to almost move away from your hand, but keep at it. You will know that you are done when there are no more limp, extremely stringy patches. So like this means that I probably should just keep mixing a little bit longer. Okay, now the dough is smooth. You'll see that it doesn't really stick to the sides of your bowl, and that's where you want it. I will keep it covered for another 15 minutes until I come back and add in the soaking bran. See you then. 15 minutes have passed since I added the salt, and now it's time to incorporate our soaked bran. You will see that it's got some water in it. It's very wet. It's also very soft, which means that you will get all of the benefits of a whole grain loaf, well, part whole grain, but it will also be fluffy like a white loaf because the bran will no longer cut through the gluten strands and through your air bubbles. But you also want to incorporate this very well, so we will now get back to the motion that I used when incorporating the salt. So you dig in your fingers and roll it a little. But before we do that, I just wanted to show you, look at this dough. Do you see it? That's what we want. So, back to work. You squeeze with your fingers a little, and don't worry now that you might be bursting any bubbles of fermentation, because the actual bulk fermentation is still ahead of us, so don't need to be too gentle, don't worry about it. And also because the dough is so wet and the bran is well soaked, you'll see that it incorporates really well. So, digging, pinching, squeezing, turning, like that. Don't forget to go underneath too. Look at this dough, look at it. It no longer sticks to anything. It's very flexible, it's very stretchy. It's also a good idea to turn this upside down so that you see what's gotten underneath and away from your eyes. Okay, this is what we want. Oftentimes I hear people ask about scoring for very wet dough. They say that it spreads all over the place, that maybe they need to take the hydration down a bit. It's really about gluten development and fermentation. This is pretty wet dough. If you think about it, there was 200 grams of water in the bran. We added here 500, so we had 700 grams of water for 800 grams of flour. That is almost 90% hydration. But this is the perfect dough for me and for scoring. And if you work it properly, if you ferment it properly, it just should not give you any trouble. After this, it is time to transfer the dough into another clean bowl. You don't want any of the dough that stuck around before the gluten was developed to harden, to make things harder for you. So I prefer a square-shaped container because it's easier for the coil folds. I transfer the dough here, like that, and I do like a light fold underneath where you take the dough like that, you let the end fall down, and then fold underneath. The dough is pretty slack now, so there won't be a lot of proper folding going on, but still, give it some shape. And just like that, it goes into my proofer at 81 degrees for half an hour. And like I said, if you don't have a proofer, your oven with the lights on will be just fine. See you in half an hour. After 30 minutes of proofing, we are ready for the first coil fold. We are going to do more of these throughout the process, but for the first one, you'll see that the dough is still pretty slack, so you don't expect to immediately fold the bottom part underneath. It will take maybe 2 tries to get to the stage where the dough has completely separated from the bowl. So that's 1, turn it around, stretch, let it drop, stretch again, and fold. And then we do this to the two other sides. The dough still feels like it will never be ready at this point. It's still liquid, it's still spreading out, but this is deceiving. By the time we're done with it, it will be the perfect thing. As you have probably guessed by the lighting, it is late now. This is the dough after 3 hours of proofing and with 5 coil folds spaced half an hour. So after 5th coil fold, I let it for half an hour and now it's ready to pre-shape. Look at it, it's so beautiful and jiggly. So my surface here is damp. I just spread some water on it with my palms. I gently pry the edge of the dough and then just flip. Don't shake it, let it just fall on its own. Properly fermented dough should be able to do that. Okay, there we go. Now, this was the dough for 2 loaves, so I will divide it now using Campbell's dough knife, which is non-stick. I still like to just dust it with a little bit of flour and divide this in 2 equal parts. I don't weigh it. I mean, if one piece is bigger than the other, that's okay. That's just what happens when you're not a professional baker. Now with lightly floured hands, I stretch the dough before folding it like this. And you see, it doesn't stick to my hands, it doesn't stick to the table, and it's all because it's properly fermented. See? Nice little future bread. Same with the second one. There we go. Downwards, left, right, bottom, and flip. You can obviously see that this one's larger than this one. Doesn't matter, don't care. I will then cover them up with a kitchen towel that I have for this purpose. And no, I don't flour the surface. Just like this. And 20 minutes should be enough. See you then. Of course, we are not done here until we know what's inside, because pretty bread is important, but you make it to eat first of all. And just a little aside here, I often get questions of the type, well, yes, it's beautiful, but how does it taste? Is it good to eat? A little secret here. You cannot achieve this unless your bread is perfectly fermented and properly done. So there is just no way that you can beautifully score a loaf that would not be good to eat. So let's dig into it. Hear that crunch? Look at this. That's what I'm talking about. So now you know how to make a loaf just like this one. If you're curious about the pattern on top, and if you haven't seen other videos of mine, I encourage you to browse through my channel, maybe subscribe so that you know when something new comes out, and get baking. Thank you for watching.